Okay. Okay, so there's the mic. Second mic here. Mic's right here. Got that? Okay. So I also want to thank Keila and Aaron for the FE. It's a great arts collective in town, and one of the things we want to do is show different venues. Obviously, on the hottest day of the year, it may not be the best place to be, but it's a really awesome place to be most of the time, all the time, hopefully. We wanted to start off with just these gentlemen talking a bit about the topic that we've got today about democracy and media and reliable information, and just kind of taking, I've got some questions for them we can ask them as well. So who wants to start? Paul, go ahead.
Fire away. All right, well, I'll just introduce myself very quickly. My name is Paul James. I'm the News and Program Director at Radio NL, probably the more divisive radio station that you are probably familiar with, but regardless. Thank you very much for having me here, Arjun. I do appreciate it. There's a lot to unpack when it comes to what we talk about when we talk about democracy these days, the way in which media handles democracy, and the way in which you guys interpret the way in which we interpret how democracy works, right? It's this symbiosis that we sort of deal with on a regular basis. And of course, there's a lot of frustration that sort of falls into it from our side, from your side, and from possibly the politician side as well. So if we can sit around and we can sort of debate in which, not necessarily debate, but sort of talk about ways in which we could see things from a different perspective tonight, I think perhaps we could all walk away a little bit better. So that's what I'm hoping to garner from this. James?
Thank you. I'm James Peters. I'm the news director at CFJC. You've probably been hearing my voice or seeing me on TV for close to 18 years next week. 18 years. Yeah. Is that a lot of people in Kamloops think that's a very short time. Thanks to Arjun for inviting me here. Arjun gave us a few questions ahead of time to prepare, and one of the questions that kind of got me thinking a little bit was about loss of trust in governments. And as I got thinking about that, I thought more about not necessarily loss of trust in governments, that a lot of people have the loss of trust in all institutions. I think has become a real prevalent in our society, and I'm no expert in the field, but my kind of hypothesis around it has to do with the sort of democratization of information on the internet. Everybody has the same access. You notice that nobody knows that they're down anymore? Everybody is really, really smart. Everybody in the world is really smart. And like a generation or two ago, and that's a kind of a starter way of talking about it, I suppose. There was, you get your answers from experts. But now it's an expert who's got their own answers. So I get the sense that because everybody considers themselves an expert on every single topic, that they no longer have trust in a lot of institutions, including government, to know what's best for them, right? Saw that a lot during the pandemic. There are people who literally have devoted their entire lives and decades of research into solutions to communicable diseases, and their opinion apparently is exactly the same as everyone else. So who is not? Anyway, those are sort of my thoughts. I don't know that people have less trust in government now than they do in all institutions, in all public institutions. Something to think about, I guess. Tim?
Thank you, James. My name is Tim Petruk. I'm the news director at Castanet Kamloops. I've also been here for almost 18 years in August.
Such a short time.
Honestly, I'm not just saying this, I was going to say kind of what James just said about the democratization of information, making everyone feel like they no longer need to rely on expertise. And that has been, I think, that was around before the COVID pandemic, but obviously the pandemic put that into really stark contrast for us. And yeah, it's something that we deal with on a daily basis with people just not trusting institutions, whether, like James said, whether it's government or media.
Just, so one thing that I wanted to ask about, given some of the discussion we just had, some of the things you said, the panel said, is there a way of kind of combining both? Like, you know, for example, you know, people know what they know in the neighborhoods, you know, what they know in their sort of, in their lives. I mean, I've been, you know, I've been in sort of like sessions where it was a conference where a hospital was, actually the hospital was getting built, and the hospital authority put a mock room in a shopping mall, just kind of show what the room would kind of be like. And they had, you know, engaged all the experts and stuff, but this guy just randomly walked in, who happened to be an architect or a design, and he said, well, the window's in the wrong place. And he was completely right. But it got missed by all these experts, or sort of the normal experts. So is there a way of combining? Like, how do you folks combine these things in the work that you do?
Expertise is not, it's not the only answer, but it's one that you have to give a lot of consideration to. Of course, it's not the only thing, but it's an important one.
When I see that scenario that you described would be the exception to most situations that we come across.
Well, obviously expertise is very important, but I think we tend to conflate sometimes opinion with expertise. Yeah. And I think that's where we sort of have a falling down. And I don't want to put a lot of blame on it, but I think we've become so accustomed to hearing other voices now within the realm of social media and online and stuff, to that point where if people don't even have an opinion, the loudest opinion is going to start shaping the way in which we feel that facts are, you know, less opinion and more fact. And I think we need to be able to find a way to sort of move ourselves beyond that. I don't know how we do that, because I think we're all sort of trying to sort our way through how to navigate what is truth, what's reality, and what is, you know, just straight up BS on social media and on the internet these days. And I think if we could sort of work our way through and sort of take a step back from, you know, paying attention to what the noisemakers are saying, and actually take a step back and do some own research for ourselves, whether that be for us in the media. Well, we do it as much as we can, but, you know, sometimes we're swayed by opinion as well. But for everybody else who's out there, I think we could actually take a step back and do a little bit more research rather than just hearing what the masses are saying. I think that would go a long way towards helping us through some of the problems that we're seeing right now, and the distrust, as James was sort of pointing out, within broader institutions as well.
So one of the things that's always a curiosity for me is how news directors figure out what to cover. You have a limited amount of time, you have a limited amount of space. Like, what goes into those decisions as to what gets on the air, gets in the paper, gets on TV, what gets online, and what doesn't?
Well, that's the ultimate challenge. Is what do we put out there that is of interest for the community? I think here in Kamloops, because Kamloops is a very sort of tight-knit community, a growing community, but still a tight-knit community. Even though, you know, you may look and we've got 100,000 people here, we still think like we're 40,000. Right? That's just the mentality that I think a lot of people have here. And that's fine. I'm not taking anything away from that, because I think that actually blends and creates a good, solid, cohesive community into itself. Anyway, getting to the point is what we try and do at Radio NL is we try and say, okay, well, what is going to be of interest for the community at large? Now, a lot of it could end up being boring, but a lot of people, engaged individuals such as yourself, might be interested in the boring. But then we also have to take into account what is actually going to be interesting for a larger population who might not be as captivated and as, you know, idealistic as perhaps some of you individuals might be. So sometimes we have to put in the things that maybe are our interest for a broader audience. I personally don't like covering U.S. politics, but it's divisive and it makes people listen and it's fun federal politics here in Canada, kind of going down that same road, right? So people want to listen to that because it gets them angry one way or the other. So we always try and find a balance in one form or another to see which, we can entertain the audience, but also inform them in the same respect. That's, from my perspective, that's what we're trying to do. But, it can differ from, station to station.
For us at CFJC, there's far more stories that we could cover than we have the time and resources to do. So there's a lot of factors. There are a lot of factors that go into deciding what we do cover. Some of them are logistical in nature. We only have so many people. We only, the deadline that we have to get a story on the news at 5 o'clock in the evening is at a certain point in the afternoon. So if something's going to come up at 4 o'clock, it's going to be much more difficult for us to get that on the news at 5 o'clock. It's a very logistical decision that we have to make to put something on the air. Others are, as Paul said, we look to tell the stories that are going to hopefully have the biggest impact, or potentially have the biggest impact on a large swath of the conversation. At the same of the community, I should say. At the same time, we don't ignore major stories for small groups of people. So there are a ton of different factors that go into deciding, and like I say, we've got, the business being what it is, we don't have the same resources that we did even 10, 15 years ago, so we have to be really selective about what we're covering.
I think that's the big thing is how different it's kind of become in the last 10 years. All of the newsrooms in town are way smaller than they were. I guess ours didn't exist 10 years ago, so we're much bigger. In our newsroom, we're kind of unique among the three of us in that we have there's fewer moving parts. All we have to do basically is find a story, write a story, maybe a video sometimes. These guys have to, produce TV stories, and they have to produce radio stories, and they have to get them on the air. We don't. So we can spend a little. I guess we can cover more things on paper. We try to focus on. I come from newspapers. I worked at KTW for a long time, and before that, the Daily News. And we have beats in our newsroom. So we have someone who covers City Hall, someone who covers TNRD, someone who covers TRUs and school district. And we try to build relationships on those beats and get to know people. And in my opinion, that's how you get the best coverage, is by really developing relationships with people in the community. And hopefully when news happens, those people will reply to your texts or your phone calls, and then you get the story. That's kind of how we approach it. Obviously, spot news is big, wildfires are big, and sometimes things happen and you just drop everything. Your whole day changes in a second. But generally, that's how we do it.
So one last question from me, and I'll open up to folks to kind of ask some questions and have some dialogue with the whole group. How can people help you? Like, what are the things that you folks need to do your jobs better that citizens can help you with?
It's very simple. See something, say something. I hate to use that parlance from the United States, but for us, we're not we're the disseminators of the information. You guys out there have that information. If we don't get it, we don't know. And it's not as though we don't want to know, but sometimes we just don't have the ability. Like James was saying, our newsrooms are limited. We have a small amount of people trying to spit out as much information to you as possible. Things are going to fall through the cracks sometimes. That's just the way things happen. So for us, the best thing that you guys can do is inform us. Let us know so that we can tell a broader audience exactly what you guys are seeing out there, right? Be our eyes, be our ears, and let us be the mouthpiece that you guys lead us to be.
Building off what Paul was saying, and very similar to him too. I mean, I sometimes struggle with our tagline on our website, which is CFJC Today. Everything Kamloops. The word everything is very intimidating. To try to, it puts a lot of pressure on. cover everything. But we are not, we're like Paul said, we're smaller than we used to be. We're certainly small enough that there's a lot of stuff that escapes us if we aren't told by people in the public. So that's why we try to keep a pretty strong presence on social media. The social media platforms that'll have us somewhere. And email, phone calls. We like to take it all because, as Paul says, there can be stuff that escapes us. We need help from the community.
I think Paul said it really well. We're the
Here's something
disseminators.
different now.
Yeah, we're the disseminators. Like we need the information. In our old newsroom at KTW, our old editor Chris Foltz would always say, "I'm not omniscient. How am I? Like I don't know everything." When people would call and say, why don't you cover this? Where's that story? And it's true. We don't know. We only know what we know from you guys.
Sometimes I'll answer a phone call with, "Oh, that's the first I've heard of it. Thank you very much for calling." And the person on the other end will be flabbergasted that we haven't heard of this. Meanwhile, it's something that's probably been fed to them by the social media algorithm that hasn't necessarily been fed to anybody in our news department.
Okay, this is the reason we're up on the stage. It's easier to see and stuff. I prefer to have things more kind of like everybody kind of be part of the conversation. So, who has some questions or some thoughts for these fine folks? Jeremy.
So,
Repeat what you say it, I'll repeat it.
sorry, I'm Jeremy. Hi. Tell me, pause it a little bit for me, if you would, on the balance between online platforms, social media as an information source, and the sort of shift from mainstream media where information has readily been available for 150 years and suddenly is not. How do we balance those two pieces of information availability as a general public?
So you got so the question was, how do we balance the online information and how do the citizens balance online information versus the more mainstream or the journalistic kind of information? Is that good?
Social media.
Social media versus what these. Well, you're on social media too, so I hate to make that distinction in some ways because you're also there, right? But yeah.
Well, and I'm sure we've all got thoughts about social media and the way that it's changed the way an audience receives information. I mean, from my perspective, you look at the wildfires in North Shuswap last year, and that was kind of one of the first major events, one of the first major spot news events since Facebook has not been carrying Canadian news sources anymore. And we heard about a lot of people who did not get very critical information that helped them make decisions about staying in their community, helped them make decisions about how they were going to help to try to protect their own properties or others. I think there is some more social media literacy that needs to happen in the community, and the realization that a social media source like Facebook or Twitter or any of them, they're not actually sources. They're feeding from sources. They're feeding based on an algorithm, based on what you've clicked on, looked at before, and so it can't be trusted. Facebook can't be trusted to be anywhere close to objective. Objectivity for those of us in more mainstream journalistic enterprises, that's what we strive for. It's not always possible, but we strive for objectivity.
I'll add to that in so much as I'll just give a little bit of a background here for myself. Before I came back here to Canada, I was living in China for 14 years, working as a journalist over there. And when I came back, the proliferation of social media was unbelievable. I mean, we had our own versions of social media over there, but of course it was very tight-knit and of course very, very closely controlled by the Chinese government. So anything that went through that was always pushed through what we call the Great Firewall. And if it wasn't related to what the Chinese government wanted to hear, well, that didn't make it through the Great Firewall. So coming back here, all of a sudden there was a dribble of information there. Now I'm being hit by a fire hose. When I came back, I thought to myself, you know what? This is a great tool. This is a very interesting and unique way in which we can sort of get a pulse of what's going on from individual people and sort of see what's happening. People will post things on Twitter or Facebook back in the day when we could see it. You could use it as a tool to try and source out what exactly was happening. But I think now part of the problem that we're running into is that, and I'm not blaming individuals in the media per se, but I'm just blaming media sources and media outlets, is that we're relying too heavily on what the internet is telling us as a way in which this is the pulse of what's going on, so this is what we should be talking about. And I think it's incumbent upon us in the media, and I think we sort of fall down on this, is that it's an easy and it's a malleable, or not very malleable tool, but it's a tool that, like I say, was originally a source of information, has now just become a source of here's what's actually, the pulse of what's happening. So I think to answer your question, Jeremy, I don't know. And I don't think that any of us have been able to source in the media, been able to try and figure out what that balance is between what social media provides as a potential tool and what it potentially can take away from us as being a reliable source. And if we could figure that out, I think that'd be great. If we could monetize it, that'd be even better.
That's the best answer I don't know I've ever heard.
I think social media can be really useful, and it sometimes is, both on, I guess, like the receiving end, like the people who are looking at their social media, but also on our end as like aggregators of news. It can be really, really useful. But it's also, and I think we've seen this in the last like 5 years, it's really kind of sped up. It's become toxic, and it's become kind of just lousy with misinformation, and it's hard to know what to believe, which I think is kind of why we're here. So it's useful in some ways, but you can't depend on it too much because a lot of it is so toxic and wrong.
I wanted to ask, sorry, intervene please.
My name is Eva. I was wondering, many professions have codes of ethics, and what is a common code amongst media? The National Post, one of our two national newspapers, cannot be persuaded to accept that Cookie Casimir reference 250 geological anomalies. Never said mass grave. And their columnists, their news reports always suggest that Kamloops, or Kamloops came out and spoke about a mass grave. Never the case. There's other examples, but I think of someone like Andrew Coyne, with whom I do not often agree, but when he was head of the editor of the opinion page at the National Post, he said, no, I'll resign my position. I'll stay as columnist, but I'll resign my position before I agree that this newspaper should endorse Andrew Scheer. And so good for him that he did that. So when does a paper stop catering to their subscribers? When is the need to make a profit? How is the need to make a profit balanced against saying what the facts are? I mean, one of the biggest problems that we're having is not just a difference of opinion, but disagreement on facts. So
Adrian's question was around, I guess, the code of ethics, and talked about a whole bunch of things that there's sort of there's been some stuff in the National Post not saying right things about what happened to Kamloops, and went to a corporate kind of idea. So what do you guys think?
My first thought after hearing that is that what the National Post does is very different than what we do. Local news is super different than national news.
Tell us how.
Well, for one, the National Post agent's example is they're pretty partisan in their coverage, and we're not in local news. Typically, there's
so maybe you have a particular code that, so tell us about it, because it does seem to me you guys are even-handed.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a code written on paper. I mean, there are different bodies that, the National News Media Council and things like that have, codes. But it's not like a regulated, it's not like the Law Society or something, right? We have our kind of internal, newsroom codes, I guess, that we follow, but it's not, at least Castanet, I guess, these guys, we don't have a written, code of ethics that we follow.
Yeah, we have professional organizations that we are part of as well that have codes of ethics. I guess I should have one tattooed somewhere so I can refer to it.
No, that's not what I meant.
But no, I know what you mean. But one thing I just wanted to mention after hearing you talk about the sort of the balance between needing your business to turn a profit and thus catering to its audience and whipping up its audience, I guess. I cannot be concerned with that side of our business. We have kind of, or I would say good organizations, good journalistic organizations should have a wall between the business side of their operation and the journalistic side. I have to tell stories of my community with integrity, and sometimes people ask me, how's the business going? Not in the public setting necessarily, but ask me how the business is going, and usually my answer is I have some vague idea that we're either doing okay or maybe less okay, but I cannot give you any kind of details into that. I just can't. That can't be what is driving my decision making as a journalist.
Well, I'll follow up on that, and what James sort of alluded to there is that there is this sort of church and state mentality that comes with the code of conduct that we sort of apply to as ourselves as journalists, which is we deal in fact, right? If you want to deal in truth, go to 101 philosophy. Fact is what we deal with because we want to get the information out there. If you want a truth or you want to deal with opinion, that's a different side of things. Now, are they intermixed these days? Absolutely they are. Now, is there a way in which we have a code of conduct to balance off the editorial side and the news side, the fact side? No, absolutely not. That's a complete gray area, and that's one that I think a lot frustrates a lot of people. And I understand that, because it creates a sense of partisanship and animosity toward what the facts are being put out. Great example is, I don't want to take shots at other media, but Fox News is a great example of this. Their opinion pieces. Oh God, I have nothing but the greatest respect for you guys up the hill there.
Probably.
No. Now, if you read the Fox News articles that they write on the internet, for the most part, they're factual, right? But when their talking heads take those same pieces and take them over and put opinion to them, well, all of a sudden they generate a slant, right? And so it creates this, I guess, lack of understanding sometimes within people who don't actually work in the industry, that there is a difference between what we do as reporters and what's actually going on as opinion makers or columnists or whatever the case may be. And I think that's part of the challenge that we need to understand, is that a lot of people don't understand that. So it becomes conflated. I don't know how to fix that. Whether a code of conduct would actually do something to affect that, I don't know. I don't think there would ever be a code of conduct, because part of the, I guess, I don't want to call it joy, but I'll call it the thing that I like about this industry is the fact that we do have the ability to tell a story in the way that we want to be able to tell a story. Whether it be, Tim's version of, events as he sees them, or James' version of the events as he sees them, they're going to be viewed differently, right? Just through the lens that we see things through our own eyes, right? right? And that's not to say that the facts are going to be wrong, but the way in which we present them may be different to you. Now, not everything is going to be cookie cutter, and I think that's a good thing. I think that given the opportunity to find your way in which you want the news delivered to you, I think actually helps, and it gives us a little bit more variety, and it gives you guys some variety as well. So, code of conduct, probably never going to happen, but I see where you're coming from, and I appreciate where you're coming from, because sometimes it's difficult to pick out the truth from the fact.
Lois, please.
Can I ask about how your organization came to make the choice of words around homeless people and the unhoused? Because I think that is brilliant in terms of creating a way of presenting knowledge that gives people another perspective.
So Lois asked the question, so I keep on repeating it, so go back in here, about the choice the media made, or who made to homeless people on the end. How does that language change? Because that was very, very good in how that kind of happened. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, honestly, I don't think it was the media that made that choice. I think it was different groups, different activist groups who work with the unhoused or the homeless, however you want to describe them. And the idea of homeless became a negative connotation, a negative stereotype. And after a while, I think the media just sort of picked up on that and decided that, perhaps this is the way in which the language needs to be portrayed these days. Now, there are different media organizations which will argue against that, and are going to use their own terminology. It all depends on which media outlet you're listening to, and which one you feel is aligned with the way in which your values should be put forward. One person's protester is another person's land defender, right? Another person's terrorist is another person's, freedom fighter, right? It's all in the way in which we interpret things. It's not to say any one of them is right or wrong in my estimation, but the way in which the language changes is the way in which society has changed as well. 20 years ago, the term, pardon me for saying so, but fag was something that was just thrown out there. Today, oh my God, if you ever said something like that publicly, pardon me for saying so, but I'm just using it as an example, this is just the reality in which things change. Media changes to accommodate the way in which society changes as well. So we're sitting here trying to take the pulse of what's actually going on in society. So this is what you're seeing, this is why things are changing, and this is why you're hearing it.
I kind of have a personal fascination with the way that language changes and the way that parlance, the general communication changes. Probably makes me more of a nerd in my newsroom than a lot of people are. I think it depends on, journalists are people who experience things in community, experience things just like everybody else does. I know certainly when I had family members who died by suicide, I started using the term died by suicide instead of commit suicide. Commit was, it's a kind of an archaic term from back when suicide was thought to be committing a crime. That's the way that, and I, now that I'm sort of in a position with some influence in my newsroom, I ensure that that's the way that we, as much as possible, if we're reporting on suicide, that we use that terminology. So I'm always fascinated by the way language is evolving to usually to humanize people, to describe people as human beings as opposed to a term that might have a connotation, whether it's demeaning or even empowering. Just describe people as human beings.
I mean, yeah, language changes over time, and like Paul said, we need to reflect our communities because we are part of our communities, and just updating language to reflect the language that's being used, whether it's being changed to be more inclusive or humanizing or whatever the reason is, it's a no-brainer to me.
I just want to follow up. Sorry, I just wanted to actually follow up on something that James brought up here, which is sort of an interesting, juxtaposition of what, and sort of how things changed. Now you talked about suicide and the sort of, I guess, the taboos surrounding it. When I started in this industry, we would never report on suicides, right? It was just it was an unwritten rule that if somebody took their own life, we wouldn't report on it, because there was sort of this unwritten rule, like I say, that if we were to do such a thing and we were to report on it, the idea would be that we're giving it credence, and this is something that would give those who would want, I guess, to die in a fashion that would be public, give them an opportunity to publicly do so, and then be reported on, right, as that last gasp. And so we didn't do that. Now, we've got mental health experts who are actually telling us, no, you should actually be reporting on suicide these days and telling people, that this person took their own life. And to me, it still rings very difficult. But in the same respect, they're saying, no, if we don't talk about it, if it becomes too taboo, then we're not getting to the root of the problem, right? And so it's this weird sort of pendulum swinging one way or the other. And getting back to the point that you were trying to make is, and the suggestion is that, the way in which language changes, I think a lot of it, reflects in the way in which we deal with the way society changes as well. So, again, not to, steal your thought there, James, but, the way in which we talk about things these days has to be able to adapt, and we have to be able to change things so that it reflects what's going on in society, but it also, tries to help out society as much as possible as well.
So, okay, Rocky, one more question, then we're gonna go, so go ahead, Rocky, after you, go ahead.
Yeah, not really a question, but
Okay. Comment.
back in the day, I owned this pizza place in Cranbrook, and Kamloops has a snow angel program through the volunteer program, which is really cool. So in Cranbrook, I wanted to introduce it to the town of Cranbrook, and when I phoned City Hall, the girl I talked to, and I said, I said, homeless people can even go shovel and get a free pizza. And she's like, we don't call them homeless people here. I'm like, oh, what do you call them? She goes, people. People that need help, people that are in need. And so I kind of like, that's really cool. And so I've been kind of talking like that ever since. But that's just an example of like City Hall doesn't use the word homelessness in Cranbrook. So I don't know if they have less homeless people there because of that initiative or not, but it's just like you're saying, words can make a difference.
They can, and I'll sort of quantify that a little bit in so much as when we write stories, or at least for us in radio, we've got 40 seconds, 45 seconds to bring you as much information as we can in a way that's both informative and a way in which is quasi-entertaining. So in cases like this, we just can't use the term people, right? We need to be able to give a quick identifier rather than say some individual who is outside and doesn't have a home to go to. Unfortunately, we need to use the term homeless or unhoused or whatever the case may be. And not to say that what you're saying is not wrong. I think that's great. I think it's a good idea to sort of bring that idea into the lexicon. But sometimes when you hear terminologies being used, because it's I guess the need to be as efficient as possible with our language, that sometimes these things will bleed into what we're trying to do here in the media, at least for radio. I can't speak to what Tim's does or even what James does, because they've got an ability to do a little bit more long form stuff. But for me, sometimes we just need to go snap, 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 and sometimes people need identifiers, unfortunately.
Can I get a big hand for these fine gentlemen here? Thanks very much. Thank you. So I've had occasion the odd time to call each of these people about stories. So I think it's all good if we consider doing that sort of thing and giving them, feeding them information. If we think it's good information, let's feed in. Whether they run with it or not is obviously up to them. But yeah, so thank you so much. It was really, really informative. I really appreciated all the insight there. Okay. Thank you. So I asked this question in a little pre-survey before the